Miles McKenna, I'm coming for your brand. Hey guys, it's your friendly neighborhood film student, and I am so excited about today's video because today we are talking about the greatest movie in the history of Western animation, Shrek 2. I personally believe this film is a masterpiece, but like on top of my own love for it, it is one of the defining works of an artistic movement called postmodernism, and I am here to defend that statement because most people would probably laugh when I say that Shrek 2 is a cinematic masterpiece, but it really, really is. I'm gonna keep the intro kind of short because I have a lot of points to make, but just as a layout of how this video is gonna work, I'm not gonna throw a bunch of film terms at you up front like I did in the Good Omens video. Instead, I'm gonna give you a little summary of what postmodernism is, and then one by one go through different themes and give examples of how Shrek 2 establishes itself as a defining text of postmodernism. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, first of all, what are you doing with your life? Go watch it now. Second, the plot picks up where the first movie left off. So in the first movie, the ogre Shrek rescues Princess Fiona. They get married, and a curse that was placed on Fiona is broken, and she turns into an ogre full-time to live happily ever after with the love of her life, Shrek. And in the second movie, they go to Fiona's home kingdom of Far, Far Away to meet her parents, and everyone kind of freaks out because she was supposed to have married the handsome Prince Charming, not some ogre from a swamp. And Shrek gets really bummed out about it, so he takes this potion that makes him turn into a human. But unfortunately, there's an evil fairy godmother who stops him from reaching Fiona after he takes the potion, and she uses her son, who is Prince Charming, to trick Fiona into marrying him. So postmodernism is both a time period and an artistic movement. We only care about the artistic movement right now. It began somewhere in the mid-1900s, and no one is really sure when it ended, if it ended at all. More and more people are starting to agree that we are now in a postmodern world, but no one really knows what the new era is or what defines it or when it started. There are definitely still some major influences from postmodernism in play, so it's really kind of a toss-up if we're still in the postmodern era or not. Regardless of that, Shrek 2 definitely falls into the time period of the era. The main theme of postmodernism is that it was a rejection of the modern era, which came before it and lasted for a really, really long time. The modern era was an artistic movement that believed that art should be exclusive and elite, and that only rich people should have access to the finest of arts. Whereas postmodernism believes that art should be popular and accessible. It also has some anti-imperialist and anti-totalitarian, that's such a hard word to say. It has some anti-totalitarian leanings, and it's really a reclamation of art for the people. So I'm gonna put a bunch of big film words up here. You don't have to worry about reading them all right now. I'm gonna go through them one by one and give you examples of how Shrek fits into them, but this is just a basic overview of some of the key themes of postmodernism. So the first main theme of postmodernism is irony, which is when what you think should happen is the exact opposite of what actually happens. So the entire concept of the Shrek franchise is an example of irony in and of itself, because you think the princess should end up with the handsome knight in shining armor, but instead she ends up with the ugly ogre who lives in a swamp and has a donkey for a steed. Now, there are three specific types of irony, and I'll just give you a quick definition and an example from the movie. So there's situational irony, which is basically that first definition of irony I gave, that when the outcome of a situation is the opposite of what you think should happen. So for situational irony, we have this feared hitman who no one dares speak the name of. When the king goes into a bar looking for him and asks to see him, the whole bar goes quiet. Oh God. And we see this dark room with these intimidating eyes, and we're not sure who this scary hitman is, but it's clear he's a terrifying figure. However, when we finally meet this hitman in person and get to see him, it ends up being the adorable Puss in Boots. So you were expecting some big, hulking, dangerous hitman, but instead you got this cute little kitty. Then there's dramatic irony, which is when the audience knows something that a character doesn't. So there is a subplot where Prince Charming pretends to be Shrek in human form in order to trick Fiona into marrying him. And we as the audience know that Prince Charming isn't Shrek, but Fiona doesn't know that. She has her suspicions, but it's still unknown to everyone except the audience. Finally, there's verbal irony, which is pretty much just sarcasm. It's saying one thing while meaning another, and that sense of humor is very present throughout all the Shrek movies, especially in Shrek's lines. He has a lot of sarcastic one-liners. So the next theme of postmodernism is hyperconsciousness. Postmodern works are super self-aware, sometimes to the point where characters know that they're characters in a piece of media. And this is super present throughout Shrek because every character is taken from a fairy tale and they're all aware of it. We see countless examples of this throughout the movie, like Fiona being expected to marry a prince, or Shrek knowing that he's supposed to be the villain in the story. Donkey is super aware that he's Shrek's sidekick.
On my honor, I am obliged to accompany you until you have saved your life, as you have spared me mine.
I'm sorry, the position of annoying talking animal has already been taken. Let's go, Shrek!
And when Shrek goes to the fairy godmother for help, she literally pulls out books of in-world characters such as Snow White and Cinderella and tells him, look at these fairy tales. None of them end with the ogre getting the girl.
Sleeping Beauty, oh, no ogres. Hansel and Gretel, no. Thumbelina, no. The Golden Bird, the Little Mermaid, Pretty Woman, no, 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 no.
And throughout the movie, we see countless examples of characters being frustrated by these roles and trying to change them. There's the major examples of Shrek taking a potion to become a human in order to fit Fiona's happily ever after. But there are also some smaller examples, such as the villains we see in the Poison Apple Bar, who are clearly unhappy with their roles in life. Even the opening sequence is super hyperconscious. We see a fairy tale book recapping the first movie and Fiona's curse, and then it goes into the tale of Prince Charming crossing scorching deserts and blizzards to rescue her. And at the end of that, we see that Prince Charming has been narrating this sequence the whole time. So right from the very start of the movie, it tells you, we're all living in a fairy tale.
And it was destiny that his kiss would break the dreaded curse.
So the next big theme of postmodernism is intertextuality, and this is the fun one. Basically, postmodern works reference other works all the time. And in order to fully appreciate a postmodern work, the viewer has to be versed in cultural references. They have to understand what the work is making a reference to. And Shrek 2 especially is packed full of references, so many that you'd have to watch the movie multiple times to pick up on all of them. So there's the more obvious example of every character being a reference to a traditional fairy tale, but there are also just little call-outs to different pieces of media all throughout the movie. For example, we have Donkey singing a sample of Tomorrow from Annie. There are portraits of Prince Charles and Justin Timberlake, and Donkey references Bob Barker, who are all modern-day celebrities. Shrek takes a dig at Sergeant Pompous and the Fancy Pants Club Band, which is a reference to Sergeant Pepper and the Lonely Hearts Club Band. When Fairy Godmother is going through all these fairy tales to tell Shrek he won't get his happy ending, she lists Pretty Woman among the examples. When they bring Mongo, the giant gingerbread man, to life, it parallels Frankenstein. Even the kingdom is named Far, Far Away after Star Wars, and at one point they play the Mission Impossible theme song. The next theme of postmodernism is parody, which is when you replicate something in order to make fun of it or critique it. So Shrek as a concept is definitely a parody of not only traditional fairy tales, but Disney fairy tales. It's poking fun at this idea of a perfect happily ever after where the handsome prince and the beautiful princess get married after one night of knowing each other. It also subverts all the fairy tale roles, so the monsters you thought were the villains are now the heroes. Beyond that, within Shrek 2, the Kingdom of Far, Far Away is also a parody of Hollywood. We see the Far, Far Away sign when they first arrive, which mocks the Hollywood sign. And as they go throughout the streets, you see all these different fairy tale versions of famous brands, which ties into a thing called commodification, but that's not important right now. It's kind of making a commentary on Hollywood. The whole thing is very beautiful, but it's pretty cold and impersonal, and everyone is obsessed with their appearance and how things are supposed to be rather than how they really are. Everything is commodified and commercial. Like I said, there are brand names everywhere. And then we have the fairy godmother, who is basically a parody of a Hollywood talent agent who is trying to manufacture happy endings, especially for her son. Shrek 2 becomes really blatant with its parody of Disney movies at one point. It's the only point in the whole story where the fairy godmother tries really hard to make it a Disney movie. She tries to have this musical number where the furniture comes to life and they're singing Sewing Mice, but it ends up just being a complete horror show.
Buffet, when you're fisting a roll in the hay, you can swoon on the moon with the prince to the stew. Don't be proud, you'll be proud. Your prince will have rock hard ass. Cheese and flame on Thursday. Have some chicken fricassee. Let's tuck here and there. Like the prince with a perfect hair.
So another theme of postmodernism that goes hand in hand with parody is pastiche. And that's when you replicate something, but you don't want to make fun of it or critique it in any way. You're just replicating it as a tribute. So it's like parody, but sincere. So almost every moment in Shrek is an example of pastiche. There are tons of little references to other movies in the way things are shot or in the actions of the characters. For example, we have Fairy Godmother arriving in a bubble like the Wizard of Oz. When Puss in Boots attacks Shrek, he bursts through his stomach like Alien and clicks like Predator. When the King and Queen throw Shrek and Fiona a wedding ball, there's a red carpet coverage of it just like the Oscars or the Grammys. There's Puss in Boots' flash dance move in the ending sequence. And there's tons more. I would have to watch the film a million more times to catch all of them. But my favorite example is when they recreated an episode of Cops but made it Knights. And here is that clip, because it's just, I have to share it in its entirety.
Tonight on Nights.
Now here's a good show.
We got a white Bronco heading east into the forest, requesting backup.
It's time for the men in steel to teach these madcap mammals their devil-may mare attitudes just won't fly.
Police brutality! Police brutality! Come on! I have to talk to Princess Fiona! You.
Will they get away with it, or did someone let the cat out of the bag?
You capitalist, big dog.
Catnip.
That's no mine.
Hold on, all right. It's mine, Princess Fiona. I'm a donkey. Tell her, Shrek. I'm her husband, Shrek. Ow, ow.
Nice.
A fun little connection to my semiotics video last week. One of the themes of postmodernism is a bombardment of signs, which basically means that postmodern texts move really quickly and they contain almost more information than you can pick up on the first viewing. So there'll be lots of little background details that can catch your eye, and also editing will be very quick, so shots will be very short and edits will be close together. So Shrek 2 is just absolutely packed with little details to pick up on, especially in the sequences where Shrek is riding through Far, Far Away, because there's just tons and tons of references to different brands, and then jokes are just thrown out rapid fire. There's hardly a single moment in Shrek that does not contain a joke, and sometimes the quick editing lends itself to that, such as in the truly iconic dinner scene.
Fiona.
Mom, Harold.
Donkey.
So now we get into the deeper meaning of Shrek 2, because yes, there is a deeper meaning of Shrek 2. Who would have thought? Postmodernism puts a huge emphasis on the viewer. because it recognizes that everyone has a different experience and that will shape how they interpret the meaning of a movie. This is called subjectivity, and it asks, who are you in relation to this movie? What characters do you relate to? What does that say about you, and what changes might that inspire in your life? Shrek 2 is a pretty radical film because it puts us in the position of Shrek, the ugly, unwanted, outcast ogre. It forces us to sympathize with a character who we would have previously considered to be the villain of the story. The movie essentially tells us, you are not the handsome Prince Charming or the beautiful princess, and you will not have a perfect fairy tale happily ever after. But that's okay. You are unique, you are flawed, and you are worthy of love and your own one-of-a-kind happily ever after. And that leads us into another part of postmodernism, which is the shift from exclusion to inclusion. As I've mentioned before, postmodernism is a rebellion against the elite upper-class mindset of the modern era. Thanks to this shift, we are slowly, not quickly enough, but slowly seeing more stories about new demographics that didn't really have much of a spotlight before, such as people of color, the LGBT community, immigrants, people with disabilities, and lower and working class characters. Shrek is kind of symbolic of this shift in a way. It's a reclamation of the narrative. It's redefining who gets to tell the story and who the stories are about. And while modernism played a huge part in pushing this standard of what is desirable, which is called the dominant ideology, discussion for a different time, postmodernism rejects that ideology. It's a re-examination of what is desirable and who is desirable and who gets to see themselves on screen. And at the core of the story in Shrek 2 is the message that you do not have to change who you are for the people you love, because you are worthy of love exactly as you are. You are desirable. This is really the most important part of postmodernism, because with that increased accessibility to art comes an increased importance in making sure that everyone's voices are heard. Now, this final piece should have probably been earlier with the less important parts of postmodernism, but I wanted to save it for last because it's my favorite part. And this is the idea of the society of spectacle. Basically, postmodernism posits that audience attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, and so you have to dazzle them to keep their attention. And sometimes in some postmodern works, the spectacle can become more important than the story. That's not the case in Shrek 2. It has a really strong story, but it also has a lot of spectacle. And ladies and gentlemen and non-binary friends, I present to you the greatest spectacle in the history of cinema. Hi, it's me in the future. I was going to put a clip here of the fairy godmother singing I Need a Hero while Shrek storms the castle on a giant gingerbread man, but I just tried uploading the video and they blocked me worldwide for copyright reasons, so I had to take it out. And here we are, and this next clip is going to be an excellent example of situational irony. I don't even care if I get a copyright strike for that. It's so totally worth it. Situational irony. So there you have it. Thanks for sticking with me through my ramblings about Shrek 2. I just really loved this movie. I love the message at its core, and it's just ridiculously well made for an animated sequel from 2003 or whenever it came out. But yeah, I kind of was thinking about this a lot during my class last semester when we were talking about postmodernism. This movie just really is a defining work of the postmodern era. It checks all the boxes of the major themes of postmodern works. And I wanted to share that because it's just such a good movie, you guys. It's just, more people should be aware that you can find art in everything. Alright, well, I had fun. I hope you had fun. Watch Shrek 2, even if you've seen it before, just watch it again. It's a fun time. And I will see you next week with the next episode of Channel Whatever News. Bye. Somebody once told me the world was gonna roll me. ain't the sharpest tool in the shed. She was looking kinda dumb with her finger and her thumb in the shape of an L on her forehead. Well, the years start coming and the ends start coming, head to the ground and somewhere running. Then it makes sense, doesn't it? Hair gets smart, but your brain gets dumb. So much to do, so much to see, so what's wrong with taking the back? You never know if you don't go. You never shine if you don't go. Hey now, you're an all-star, get the show on, go play. Hey now, you're an all-star, get the show on, get paid. And all that glitters is gold. Only shooting stars break the mold.